live stream. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Namaste, assalamu alaikum, good evening, good night, or good morning to all of you. We are so pleased to have people in this meeting from all parts of the world in different time zones. I am Shakira Mohammed of Trinidad and Tobago, a teacher for the past 17 years. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the 248th edition of our ICC Thought Leaders Forum. We wish to sincerely thank all of you who have contributed in whatever way to the success of this ongoing Pan-Indo-Caribbean and Pan-Indian Diaspora global project. In the past 4 years, 9 months, and 1 week, we have featured 1,211 presenters from all parts of the world speaking on 247 topics. And this is a weekly forum being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center, a legally registered research and publishing company operating since 2010. And in order to continue this weekly program and to make it bigger and better, we are kindly asking for suggestions as well as volunteers. And if you give a donation, your name will be placed on our poster and all promotional materials, and you can contact Dr. Mahabir for details. I'll introduce our moderator today, who is Shalama Mohammed, the co-director of this ICC Zoom platform, who is a business teacher and researcher from Trinidad and Tobago. She obtained her master's degree in business psychology from Franklin University in the USA. Shalama, welcome.
Thanks so much, Shakir. Assalamu alaikum, namaste, and a warm welcome to all of you. Thanks so much for choosing to be here with us. This program is being recorded on Zoom and live streamed on the YouTube channel of the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center. Welcome to all of you on YouTube at this time. To avoid intrusions from trolls, we've decided to allow members of the audience to view and participate via YouTube only. And you all have been doing so well for the last few weeks. I want to thank you very much for your understanding and cooperation. Our program today is Carnival Culture in the Indian Diaspora. Carnival is a 2-day festival in Trinidad and Tobago and will be celebrated in all its pomp and revelry next week on Monday and Tuesday. But today is Mashramani in Guyana, a carnivalesque celebration of Republic Day. Carnival culture is a vibrant expression of identity. So we are asking, in what ways have Indian communities rooted in the histories of indentured laborers who migrated to countries like Trinidad and Guyana contributed to the evolution of Carnival through music, masquerade, or elaborate costumes? Secondly, does Carnival culture blend Indian traditions with the festive spirit of Caribbean and other global celebrations? To what extent do Indian diaspora communities worldwide embrace or resist Carnival? We hope to have some answers from our esteemed panel of speakers, and we begin today with Burton Sankarali of Trinidad. He's a philosopher, specifically Darshanik, and theology graduate from the Catholic Seminary. He teaches philosophy, religion, and philosophy of religion at the Presbyterian St. Andrew's Theological College in Trinidad. Welcome, Mr. Sankarali.
Hi. Thank you.
Welcome.
Yes. So I'm on?
Yes, you are.
Okay. I don't know if what I have here might go a little over time, so feel free to give me a 5-minute warning so I'll know how to adjust that at that point. Okay.
Sure.
I'm, as I kind of indicated to Dr. Mahavir, I might be taking a kind of a different take, looking at it philosophically, metaphysically, in terms of spirituality. And I want to begin, I should be reading, but I want to begin by setting something that is known in the African diaspora or in African studies related areas, perhaps as the Congo cosmogram, uh, called the Tenva Nza Congo, the sign of the four moments of the sun. It's a metaphysical indication of domains of metaphysical domains. In its most basic presentation, you will see a basic cross with circles on the four ends of the cross, which symbolizes the cross symbolizes intersecting worlds up above and below and the vertical, and the sun sweeping through intersecting worlds and different spiritual domains, such as the world of the living and the world of the dead. So, like in that case, when it's midday here, it's midnight in the world of the dead, and when it's midday in the world of the dead, it's midnight here. Um, so this is a basic kind of spiritual matrix that is important to understanding the African, how the African spirit has articulated itself in our part of the world, derived from West Central Africa. And I'm saying it relates to Carnival. It can be used as a means for understanding what is happening, or how to engage what is happening in what I would call the Trinidadian culture space, right? So let me start by reading now. I say here, I want to make a controversial statement that the core matrix of what we call Carnival in Trinidad is born of the emancipation eruption of the African spirit on the street, the road. This is Canboulay. I mean, what we have is definitely no French Creole Mardi Gras. The African vibration is the ocean of metaphysical energy carrying the costume. Indeed, the spirit is here disclosed. And I further propose that this is no random bacchanalian wildness, but articulates such a defined, such a defined living metaphysical matrix. This matrix may be understood in terms of the Congo cosmogram. The dancing, spinning cross, this with the circling sun inscribed at its 4 points. This way our living ancestral patterns converge and occur and show themselves. This on the road. Road is the earth in movement. Thus we are engaging the vital kinetic of dancing ancestral energy. What does all this have to do with Indians and Carnival? Well, for starters, African and Indian cosmology possesses insight into reality as metaphysical dance, Leela. And this is what Carnival is. The cosmogram gives access to worlds, to spiritual domains. And this is what Carnival is. In this chaotic creative dance, our worlds collide, unleashing possibility. And this is what Carnival is. The spiritual Baptists of Trinidad and the Caribbean navigate this cosmogram in the rite of mourning. They call it the mourning, right? A term they have for such metaphysical worlds is nations. So on the road, nations dance and converge. And here we may understand the living Indian presence in Carnival, the Indian nation. Here is a living, dancing, metaphysical presence. As disclosed in the Leela Hinduism, as disclosed in the Leela, Hinduism and African traditional religion / spirituality represent energy systems, the unleashing of Shakti. And it is such Shakti, such dancing spirit that we see in the Indian presence on the road. The whip jab or jab jab, and the flashing whips of Kali Puja. Chutney, its roots in traditional Indo spirituality, such as the Matikur. The Sumari, born of the traditional dance of the goddess, the Divine Mother. Let me also mention that the Ramlila field suspiciously resembles the cosmogram. It even has a center pole. You could look at the Ramlila field and actually see what the Congo people would call the cosmogram there, I find, right? We may note the Indian presence is very prominent and at times dominant in carnivals outside of Port of Spain. And indeed, across the board, Indians have been a powerful presence in every aspect of Carnival. We can call names like Jit Samaru and Raul Garrett. All this is not accidental. It is dancing, unfolding Leela in the metaphysical space of the road. It is many articulations. So I'm using the road here in many senses. I want to mention stick fighting, a powerful intersecting spiritual practice involving Indians and Africans. And here there is further intersection with the traditional Indian jab jab mass. Also, as Sat Balkaran Singh reminded me, Indian stick fighting, Lati, Gatka, was an aspect of the Hose observance. Here carrying into the space that is the road a living spiritual presence. Shiite Hose, whose roots include Hindu street procession, discloses an Indian engaging of the road that may be seen as paralleling Kanbule. Our living kinetic earth as shared space. In the 19th century, it was a massive observance before this was violently and bloodily crushed by Massa, by the colonial power, right? But Jose continues. This clearly reveals that such street engagements and kinetics are powerfully inherent to our Indo-ontology. Of course, when we look at our range of spiritual expression, Hindu, Islam, African, traditional, Christian, such engagement is present. Indeed, this is not only unique to Trinidad, this procession or engaging of the road in this way, right? However, I propose that in our Trinidadian carnival space, such kinetic engagement of the road bears very specific significance. The carnival ontology so radically defines our space. This regardless of what cultural or religious tag one carries, or I would rather see it as defining of our total cultural intersection. Let me also note that the first peoples from across the region, when they gather here in Trinidad, their own spiritual ontology also takes to the road and so claims it. This is fundamental in that it is this indigenous presence that grounds us, and it is to this we all need to turn for our presence on this bit of earth to have truth and legitimacy. We also know that the Indian mass characters has roots in the indigenous first people's presence. We see here that this space is expansive as it erupts in Trinidad rooted and oriented carnivals in many parts of the world. Another discussion. The kinetics of the road involves motor vehicles, as with the mic man, and in the processing of cars in the Hindu wedding. Then there is that conflicting yet intersecting space of the political motorcade. The story is told, I can't verify it properly. The story is told that once two opposing motorcades passed each other on the highway, and what in other places may be a cause of violence, here provided an opportunity for the participants to exchange alcohol. We can make carnival of everything. And this brings us back to intersecting Indian and African energy systems. The encounter of the two as ethnic groups was colonially framed in terms of conflict. Moreover, there was a Euro-hegemonic Creole imposition that placed Indians at the margin. Just as globally the West, as the very terminology indicates, labeled the East as other. Of course, even such Euro-hegemony gets sucked into the vortex of the road. Nevertheless, these intersecting Indo and Afro matrices are radically inclusive and embracing. This in the midst of all the violence, conflict, and chaos. Such is the nature of carnival space. The cosmogram as portal to worlds. This brings us to carnival and death, or perhaps I should say carnival and the ancestors. The Tenva Nza Congo matrix we are engaging is key portal to the ancestral realm. Our intersecting wake culture, which may be viewed as celebrating life in the midst of death, discloses the Leela we are engaging. Indeed, the complex of wake and wake-related practice is profoundly present and even in a sense grounds the Kanbule. This includes the calendar, stick fight. That such energy and vitality be seen as profoundly related to carnival is not accidental. Indeed, here is disclosed its essence. In the African insight, death and sex are the two portals to the other side. In terms of Indo-disclosure, the Huse is a funeral procession. And while we would not describe the motorcade procession of the Hindu funeral in carnivalesque terms, it is a most intense and radical metaphysical engagement of the road. Perhaps it is most appropriate that we acknowledge this radical nexus, as in so doing we honor our ancestors who gave their lives for this struggle. I would argue that carnival space born of Kanbule and the matrix of the cosmogram, unfolding in our intersecting culture's ontology of the road, has provided the primary key to understanding our specifically Trinidadian landscape. Such central practice here revealed in the vitality of the lime. Trinidadians make a lime of everything, and ideally, one can say everything we do can be so disclosed. Here is revealed in our cultural intersection our people's play, Leela, of life and energy, centrally disclosed as carnival space. However, it further seems to me that this carnival key, as the primary key, has to give way. Carnival, as is our entire society, is in crisis. And as in the case of the ancient canboulay of our ancestors, a paradigm shift is called for. Yet here the vitality of Carnival will continue and will indeed play its role in the birthing. This shift is not going to be the preserve of any one group or culture. Rather, all must participate. All our people are here called together to create something beautiful. And just as and just as Africans who the day before were labeled slaves, Emancipation Morning took on an apparently all-powerful Euro-colonizing system in seizing the road by the scruff of the neck to make it their own. Indians of the Caribbean will do no less. Okay, good timing, I think. Thank you.
You did excellently for time, and that was quite an
Okay,
interesting presentation,
Yeah.
I have to tell you. I've never
Yeah.
heard this concept of the Congo cosmogram.
Cosmogram. You will find a lot of it on YouTube. You see it in Haitian voodoo. They are called veves, and Cuban palo. They are called firmas. The Baptists and the Jamaicans call it seals. The Brazilians call it pontos. It's seen in Africa because it's a very powerful symbol. Yeah, and it's metaphysical in nature, accessing these words.
Yeah, very,
Yeah.
very interesting. So I
Yeah.
want to thank you very much for that presentation. And
you.
I want to ask you to please stay with us, because what I want to do is I want to bring on our next speaker, and then we
Yeah.
will open up for some questions, and then we'll take the other two speakers, and then we'll open up for some questions. So I'm giving the
Okay.
audience some time to post us those questions. Is that okay with you?
Yes, thank you. Yes. That's satisfying
Terrific.
to the
Thank you
speaker.
very
Yeah.
much. So let me
Thank you.
introduce our next speaker now. And this is none other than Dr. Satbal Karan Singh. So he is an economist, a former senior public servant. He's a playwright, he's a choreographer, and performing artist specializing in dance. He's also an author of several books, including one titled The Shaping of a Culture. Welcome, Dr. Balkaran Singh.
Thank you. My pleasure being here. You do have my slides, so I would go
Yes, it's coming up now.
with the slides, right? And we can then take it from here. Thanks for having me. Right? I haven't been on ICC for a while. Right? I want to start. Let's do the first slide. Go into the second slide, and really to ask, what is Carnival? There are many definitions to Carnival. It's a traveling fun fair. It's a circus. It could be called a circus, merrymaking, especially those occurring at regular intervals and dates, right? We know very much that it is influenced significantly by Roman Catholicism and European Christianity. It's a pre-Lenten carnival, meaning there is Carnival, but I'll explain that. Abstinence from flesh. We go into the history of it to understand the whole Indian aspect of it. It's a pagan festival, and when we use the word pagan, we need to be clear that when Europe used the word pagan, it was a derogatory term. But pagan simply means folk. So it was a a Saturnalia festival. It's associated with Greco-Roman gods, Dionysus, with Bacchus. It begins, and it also includes the Egyptian goddess Isis, which is agriculture, right? And I would show relationships with that into Indianness and Hinduism. But we're going into Carnival. Carnival, we know that it started moving out of Europe with colonialism. Around the 15th century, colonials, Christopher Columbus encountered Trinidad the same year that Vasco da Gama. They were both looking for a sea route to India. And Vasco da Gama in 1498, Christopher Columbus in 1498 encountered Trinidad. He started in 1492. Vasco da Gama in 1498. Where does Carnival fit into that? The Portuguese were in India from 1498. In 1510, the province of Goa, and I will talk about Goa after, invited the Portuguese. Now, Goa at that point in time were being run by the Mughals, the Muslims, and they invited the Portuguese to come and invade Goa so that the Hindus would take over. The Portuguese invaded, they won, and they ruled India from 1510 to 1961, over 400 years. So Portuguese Christianity, Roman Catholicism was in India for 400 years. In Trinidad, it came with the French from the small island, Guadeloupe, Martinique, after the cedula of population, where the Spaniards invited other denominations to come to develop Trinidad, and the French came in. They introduced it around 1780s. So you have 200 years of Carnival in Trinidad. You have 400 years of Carnival in Goa. Not many people know about it. Today, Trinidad's population is about 26% of Hindus. And I'm dealing with all the groupings put together. You have 40% of Goa's population Hindus. Sorry, the other way. 40% are Christians, 60% Hindus. Why I'm comparing it with Trinidad? Goa is as small as Trinidad. Goa is on the same coordinates as Barbados, and it has hundreds of kilometers of beaches. So it has the same kind of climate, right? In Trinidad, my last statistic was for Carnival. We had last year about 15,000 people coming for Carnival. In Goa, 1 million comes for Carnival. Goa's Carnival, like Trinidad Carnival, it's a mask of happenings. It is just one of the carnivals of the world. And the Portuguese went from Portugal into Goa, into Africa. They went from Goa into Portugal, into Brazil. So there is an Indian influence of Carnival in the Brazilian Carnival. I have seen photographs of a mass band in Brazil. Every year, their theme is Mahatma Gandhi. So there is a Hindu input into it, right? And as there is in Goa and as there is in Trinidad. we've dealt with the trading routes. We're moving down, right? I've just indicated its coordinates. There's a picture of Goa, and these are the major places in Goa: Mapsa, Panjim, which is the capital of Goa, Vasco da Gama, and Margao. These are the main places. And the interesting thing about Carnival in Goa is that you have the street parades, you have the mass, but there are things called teatro tales. A tale is a theatrical play. And they have these plays all over Goa. They are both Christian, but they're non-Christian too in origin. So you are looking at, and there's influence now of Indian and Hindu involvement in the carnival. We've got a picture here. The carnival in Trinidad, we have king and queen of the bands. Each band of masquerade, they have their own king and queens, and on Carnival de Masquerade night, they compete. There's competition. In Goa, there's one king and queen, King Momo and his queen. So there is no competition in that respect. We go down. Right. The Trinidad Carnival, it's ritual, it's festivity, it's a metamorphosis, it's legendary, mythological, and I've indicated that. It's fibrous, it's intertwined, it's multi-layered, it's a matted mass of thoughts, its actions, its behavior patterns, its defiance. I'm taking from where the first speaker indicated, defiance, right? Hypnotic ecstasy and satiety on the streets. It's purification, it's healing, and it's a catharsis, right? Epiphany and catharsis. Devotees come and they go from chrysalis to butterfly, to ordinary mortals, to devils, to imps, to robbers, to heroes, to gods. What they are doing is they are playing the mask. The mask is not a new thing to any civilization, whether African, Chinese, Indians, because in Indian civilization, the mask is really critical to the folk theater and folk culture. The mask we wear, the makeup functions as a mask, but in India, in the dance form, in Chow, in Kathakali, there were huge masks to play the themes that they are going to be enacting. In Yakshagana, there are masks again. In the temples, you see a plethora of masks. In the Ramayana, right, which is about 11,000 years written, the Ram story, which is very much a part of Trinidad. It's not carnival, not the definition of carnival, but it is play and it is display. So we can say, yes, the Ram Leela is part of this play and display. And the costuming and the masks are the same. Whether you see it on the street or you see it in the savannah, in the Ram Leela, you have it in two places. You have the Maidan, which is the savannah, and then you have Manch, which is the stage. But in the savannah, there's also street. The last day of the savannah Ram Leela, they go on the street. When Ram returns from his battle or his war in Lanka, he returns to Ayodhya, and that is played out on the street. It is energy that that pervades the entire, not only the Ram Leela players, but the streets, because everybody from their houses in Felicity, they come out, right? And what we call parche. They use arti on the main characters of Ramlila. Arti generates energy. So it is an energy principle we are dealing with. It not only energizes the people who do it, it energizes the whole village. And when you're talking about 35 Ramlilas in Trinidad, and each village doing it at the same time, you are generating that energy, which is really a Hindu thing, right? But it's also a civilizational thing. It's an African thing. They may not use the same method of that generation, but it's also a First Peoples thing. You have in Trinidad, you have smoke ceremony of the thing. So I am looking at that energy principle of Hindus or those religion civilizations that promote this concept of street theater of identity. Timing, we have dealt with Epiphany. What is in the carnival now? Preparation for the carnival. That whole period, it used to be from Epiphany, right? That's it, 12 days after Christmas. Now it begins in September, October, and you have various stages of planning, and then you have implementation of putting your mask together, implementation of the security, of the music, planning for the music, the steel band, panorama. So the energies are really very high. Judging the construction of the village, because wherever there's carnival in Trinidad, there's a lot of construction that takes place for the parades and the bleachers and things like that. Then the pre-carnival, the steel band, Soca, junior, senior, then chutney. Indians are very heavily involved in the chutney, and you have Soca chutney now. Hell of a lot of parties taking place where you're not using the word Hindu, but you're using Indian here. So Indian is very much involved in the carnival. The next slide we could use, right? The competition. You have children, street parade. An interesting thing about the carnival in Trinidad, which we don't have in Goa, you don't have children in the Goa carnival. At least when I was there, I've been there twice. You don't have that 4 days of mass, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday on the streets. You have many more days in Trinidad on the streets. You have children's carnival, you have junior calypso king and queen, you have king and queen of the bands later on. That's the carnival days, that's the Sunday, the March Gras, the competitions, and Monday and Tuesday, the bands on the street. You have Juve starting, right? Oh, it's called Old Mass. You're almost like sending out the old energies and you're bringing in the new energies. I'm trying to use metaphorical statements here, right? But it's satire. It's a lot of satire. It's making mock of, it's burlesque, right? And then you have what we call the pretty mass. And if you look at the Trinidad Carnival, you cannot separate Indians from non-Indians, right? You cannot separate the costumes and from costumes to music. So we do have that total involvement I am seeing. There are those who would not be involved and who would say it is not an Indian thing, but it has become, right? Then masquerade bands, costume, music, food. There's a lot of Indian food in it. Next slide. Tell me about the timing. How am I doing? The Kiddies Carnival. This is in St. James in Trinidad. So you see, they make the mass in the schools. They take a theme and they move on the streets, and there's competition.
That
We
you should
move
be
into the
making your
next
closing
one.
comments now.
Hmm?
You should be making your closing comments now.
Right.
Thank you.
You've got the mask on Tuesday. We can go further. Right. Music and dance. We have talked about that. Calypso, soca artists, steel band, brass band, Tassa and Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Trinidadian drumming in the carnival. This year, there has been Tassa with a band, a steel band in Arima, Angel Harps. But that is not the first time. That started in the 60s with Guinness Cavaliers and Bobby Mohammed. So you have that merging of two aspects of our music, right? The energies. And the street parades are the same. And I would close by saying, with respect to the Trinidad Carnival, there are three aspects of culture or religious persuasions: mantras, yantras, and tantra. Burton spoke about the cosmology, so you're dealing with a yantra there, right? There is also tantra. On the carnival days, you have got Shivaratri. The interesting thing about Shiva and carnival, the Greco-Roman aspect of it, is Dionysus is androgyne, male and female. Right? Shiva is androgynous, male and female. Right? Half of Shiva is portrayed as male and the next half as female. So you see both aspects. And for Shivratri, which falls on the carnival, one of the carnival days, invariably, Shiva is invoked as Mahadev, God, Lord of all lords, right? Also known as Nataraj, the Lord of the Dance. And Peter Minshall has, in 1995, portrayed Shiva in his mask costumes on the head. So you have the Nataraj. With Mahashiva, he's the tantric. The energy that one gets out of Shivaratri and Hinduism is simultaneously or parallel portrayed in the carnival. So I think I have given an indication that yes, there's a lot of mixing, there's a lot of Indians in carnival, whether it is in Trinidad or it's in Goa or there's some in Brazil. There certainly is in New Orleans, right? Because I've been there and I've seen Indian influences in the carnival. I thank you.
Thank you. An extremely enlightening presentation again. And it raises a lot of questions. I'm going to bring some of the comments and the questions from members of the audience. But Sad, please clarify this for me. You said carnival is abstinence from the flesh. That was originally what it meant, right? In the French term, carnival, abstinence from the flesh, correct?
It was a farewell before.
When Christianity took root, remember, Carnival was a Saturnalia festival. The Roman Catholic Church could not get rid of it. So they had to incorporate the Carnival into their religious things. And since it was moving from winter where they had packed up all their food and things and their meats, they would use it out and they would move into Lenten. Lenten, they associated Lenten for 40 days of Jesus's penance, right? And therefore, Carnival became a pre-Lenten, and that's how it was incorporated in the Roman Catholic Church. So they say, okay, we're going to eat out all those meats and everything. Then for the 40 days, there's pre-Lenten, we are going to fast.
Right. So,
Carnival.
right.
Does that answer the question?
Yes, it answers the question, but it raised another one because today, when you reflect on Carnival and the parades on the street, what you see is an exposure of the flesh. So are you saying that they go hand in hand?
When you go on Ash Wednesday morning, the same people who are playing themselves out, who are playing out their illusions and their likes and their dislikes and what they wanted to be, because they were playing the mask. So if their mask indicated that we want to be naked or various stages of naked, on Ash Wednesday, when they go to the church to get their ashes, they are fully dressed because they have removed that mask. Does that answer your question? It becomes Lenten, it becomes fasting, it becomes thinking about God. Whereas the days before, you were playing what you wanted to be, who you wanted to be.
So you're putting back on the mask as of Ash Wednesday, a different
Yes.
mask.
A different mask.
Right. I just wondered, and Mr. Sankrali can come in here because I'm wondering whether or not this exposure of the flesh is why he said in his presentation that today Carnival is in crisis. Is this what you meant?
Well, it's kind of an inside Trinidad thing. Trinidad have a sense. You have a sense now that the country is in a crisis, and I think there's also widespread dissatisfaction of even aspects of Carnival that linked to the excessive commercialization, for instance, the state of calypso, the general violence in the society that Carnival could give an outlet for. Although I still think, given how violent our society is becoming, the actual crime at Carnival might be remarkably low, given that hysteria. But Carnival kind of makes present what is happening in the society. That's my thesis. The collision, the chaos, the creativity, the superficiality. And I just don't think Trinidad is in a good state now. And what I'm pointing out is that Carnival has functioned as this very important paradigm to understand Trinidad. So the Carnivalesque is this general motif found in cultures. My thesis is that it has specific bearing in terms of Trinidad and what the Africans did in emancipation. But I think our society as a whole is reaching another point of crisis, and a new kind of paradigm is being called for. One in which all our people will hopefully participate,
Right. So to
Yeah.
both of you, gentlemen, thank you for that. To both
Right.
of you, this question is from Dr. Betty Govindan from South Africa, or rather it's a comment that she's making, and I'd like you all to respond. She's saying Carnival is an act of resistance and the affirming of one's identity. Do you agree?
Yeah, it is an act of resistance against forces that seek to suppress self and culture and spirit. So it's that act of resistance. In this, you're affirming identity, but it's an affirmation that takes place in a context of a collision and an intersection that can be disruptive, but is also very creative. So it's an affirmation that is still fluid, both being and becoming, and it takes place in which these different groups and cultures both affirm who they are, but intersect and create something together,
Okay,
If I
great.
may,
Sorry,
if
Sat,
I
you
may
wanted to add.
come in here, Burton has spoken about the resistance part, but the carnival is used by the masqueraders to invoke their own realities, their own identities. That's why they wear all these huge costumes with all these masks, and that's why they wear nothing. I would read one thing, a few lines. right? So while Hindus worship at the altar of fertility with a controlled, directed focus and with pious reverence, identity, the carnivalists are unknowingly invoking this energy, titillating the senses and sex organs, and activating the fertility ritual, the period set aside for creativity and regeneration, with an unrestrained and vulgar joyousness. It's an identity, right? This is the chaos of the mask, the paradox of the festival, and indeed the murmur of life itself. Hope that
Answers the question.
answers a bit of your.
Yes. Thank you.
I
So
can
let's
also, I can also, excuse me, I can also make this paper available. I could send it in a little while to Dr. Kumar,
yeah,
who
we
can
would
send it to all
appreciate
of
that.
you
If
all.
you could
Okay?
send it to
Yeah,
us
let me
via
do that.
email, we can certainly share
Yes,
it
I,
with our participants
yes,
today.
as soon as my laptop's available, I'll send it.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Good.
So let's just take another question from Weaving, and this is, can the shared Indian and African cosmology be considered a form of religious syncretism or creolization?
Well, syncretism is a kind of a theoretical model devised in, Western anthropology and studies of this. So it can take on the appearance of what we call syncretism. I prefer to see creativity as simultaneously an affirmation of our ancestors and of creating something new. I don't think our people see those things as contradicting. So you can be African and Indian at the same time. There's no exclusivity. This kind of exclusive thinking, a lot of it comes from a Western thought mode. And it's both affirming of the ancestors and new. So I don't like the word syncretism, although if you're into that, it could take on aspects of that when you look at it, Yeah.
Okay, what about creolization? Religious
Same,
creolization?
same there. It's not a word I like, although I think it's dealing with the same kind of intersecting culture. In my own experience, the word Creole has it has very negative, pejorative meanings when it's used by people on the ground, both by Indians and Africans to refer to Africans. So it's not a word I like, and sometimes it is used by some theorists I find to deny the fundamental nature of the ancestral, which I think is key to the process of creation.
Right.
If I may,
Sure.
the definition of the term Creole is someone born outside of their original or ancestral place. So therefore, all of us who are born in Trinidad, whether Chinese, Africans, Indians, whoever, are Creoles, right? You have rice. I'm using another analogy, rice. You have rain-fed rice and you have hill rice. But in Trinidad, how it is called? Creole rice, rain-fed rice, because it's planted here. If you use that terminology and you understand the terminology, you won't bring it into a Trinidad environment to say Creole, right? Last night I was delivering a lecture and somebody indicated to me, you see that word Creole, I cannot associate with it. And if it has to be that we are born in Trinidad, I'm an Indian Creole.
Yeah.
Again, it's how you interpret things.
Correct.
And certainly African thinkers, I would say in recent years, have been rejecting it as a term for self-identification on that point. Yeah.
Yeah. So education is important.
Yes.
One more question. Someone is asking, please comment on the Indian origin of the Borokit.
That is that speciality.
Well, look, in India, almost every single state you go to, right? The horse was a major icon of travel and transportation, right? When the Indians came to Trinidad, to the Caribbean, I have been to Guadeloupe, where they still have their cut ghora, Cut means wood, right? So wooden horse. They brought the image of that icon, right, of the horse, but it's called Kat Ghora in Jamaica. It's called Kat Ghora, right? In Trinidad, it's called Sumeri. Why Sumeri? When they would sing, they would be on the streets, and they would pull the horse, the reins, and say, Su Mary Jan, my dear, slow down. Sumeri. Sumeri. And then it became Sumeri. The Trinidad Guardian in 1922 talked about Burukit or Sumeri being done by Indians in Bosnia, in Port of Spain. Right? So you're looking at it from so far back, 102 years now. So there is that presence. Remember, Indians contributed a lot, like Burton already indicated, the jab, right, which came out of Kali worship. Nowhere else in the mass have I seen where you beat yourself stiff and the next day your whole back is bleeding. Why they could do it? Because it has come out of Indians' Kali worship, right? So just like that, you have an Indian Burukit, as they sing from Buro Kid, the young person on the donkey. Burukid, Burukit, Sumeri, Kat Ghora, identity. You've seen the relevance.
I think that could also throw light on the on the Sumeris linked to, I believe it's called the Harichan dance.
Yes.
Which is a horse dance related to Durga, to the dance of the Divine Mother. So it has that very powerful nexus. Yeah.
Maybe I should explain that. Harichan was Harish Chandra, the king Harish Chandra, and in his court, many people came with their own stories. So Harichan dance would bring one story of that court of King Harishchandra, Harichan dance. And
But
of
I'm
course,
just wondering why it ended up in our society. Is it perhaps some kind of resistance against colonial masters? As in
it was not all.
beating the Indian like a horse?
The resistance, I don't know if you want to associate spirituality here with resistance. They just
Carnival,
wanted to be
I
part
think
of
the
it.
spiritual aspect of it left a long time ago.
They don't.
Not
They have
the jabs. They fast. They maintain sexual discipline to take that pressure. They have to prepare themselves spiritually. The one established jab house in Cuba, Alfred, his brother, runs a Kali temple. That's what he told me. And in Kali temple, the masters whip themselves and, well, invite themselves to be whipped to show it's a genuine possession. I believe it's linked to the whole tantric tradition. Again, Sat could throw more light on these things, where people do these things to the body to show that it's Shakti working through them and that power working through them. Yeah.
And
They don't
I
only
was
do
making
it to
reference to, thank you for that, but I was making reference to the Burukit Sat.
What I have not seen, I'm not aware, I have not read anywhere where people were whipping themselves in the Borokit. They may have had a whip on the horse, right? But the horse was not an individual, a person. That's why it's called Kat Ghora, wooden horse.
Okay, thank you. So we have a question from Dr. Mahaber. Go ahead, please.
Concerning the Burukit or the horse dance, I have done some research on this masquerade. It has been published. It's probably there on the internet in a Carnival magazine that I did about 20 years ago, 25. And this is a universal kind of performance, particularly in the Hispanic societies. But what happens quite often is that people in various cultures have adapted and even adopted and even appropriated it to make it their own. But it's there, just like the this one with the stilts, dancing on stilts. How do you call that? It's not
Mokojambis.
Mokojambis.
it's not unique to Africa. I have seen it
No,
many places. So
I have seen it done
sometimes
in
these are
India.
universal.
I've seen it done. I've seen the Kadgoras, particularly in those states in India where that horse, right, was a very important animal for transport and for war. So they used it, right? So I don't know if it is misappropriation. It's just appropriation. Yeah. But thanks for
All
that,
right.
Dr.
Gentlemen,
Man.
it's been a wonderful conversation. Terrific presentations, very, very enlightening. And the audience members are also expressing appreciation to you. I want to thank you very much. I want to move on to our next speaker now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So let me introduce Professor Ryan Prasadi, who's from Canada. In Canada, but originally from the USA.
We should do more of this together.
He's an artist, he's an educator and writer of Trinidadian ancestry. Originally from Toronto, he's a visiting professor of gender, sexuality, and intersectionality studies at Connecticut College. Welcome, Professor Prasadi.
Thank you so much. So excited to be here. Thank you to everyone for having me and for Dr. Maibir for reaching out to me. Very cool connection, but actually Dr. Maibir's book on folklore spirits was actually one of the first books I ever got. My grandmother gave to me when I was in high school. So when I saw your name, I was like, that's very cool. And yeah, as Ms. Mohammed noted, I'm originally from Toronto, from a Trinidadian family, so it's so lovely to hear Trini accents. I'm in Connecticut right now, where there are no Caribbean people, so this has been really lovely. And yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm going to be reading a bit, just because I'm sharing some new work that I've been producing as part of my PhD dissertation, which I'm defending this summer. So any comments, feedback, anything is really helpful. Critiques, everything is welcome. And yeah, I'm just gonna jump right in and get started. Oops. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so in the Trini accent, we are seeing your slides.
Thank you. Okay, so my work, my doctoral work particularly looks at diasporic Soca fetes. And I look at the Soca fete as a place where particularly queer and trans Indo-Caribbean communities can access theorizations of self, belonging. And I'm particularly looking at in this study the relationship between LGBTQ Indo-Caribbean folks in Toronto and New York City, and the relationship to Soca music, which I'm tentatively calling in this dissertation Soca feminism, and looking at the ways in which Soca music and engagements with Soca music by queer and trans Indo-Caribbean diasporic communities provides them with cultural resources to think through and transgress identity frameworks, belonging frameworks, and also issues of homo and transphobia that they have to deal with when living in the diaspora. And so the title of this presentation today is called Chumke Feminisms, which I'm going to explain in a second, embodied declaration and queering Indo-Afro relationalities as pedagogy. And just to give you a little sense of what these fetes look like, I've called these fetes these LGBTQI Soca fetes that are produced to build resilience and community and belonging for queer and trans Indo-Caribbean and Afro-Caribbean communities as queer fetes. right? And so these are just some pictures I've taken from queer fests I've attended in Toronto, New York City, many of which I've produced myself as a queer Caribbean person. And so you're seeing on the left-hand side some pictures of a fete where these are mostly performers. So one of the sort of the staples of these queer fests that's different than, say, the mainstream heterosexual fete, right, is that drag and burlesque performance is a huge part of what happens in these soca fete spaces. And so you are seeing one of the casts here of these queer soca fetes and what they sort of were doing after the show, right? And these are also some other pictures from FETS. So on the left is a Indo-Caribbean dance company that was performing Nagara at one of these queer FETs. In the middle is a Dogla drag artist named Calypso Cosmic. That's from Toronto. And on the right is a DJ named DJ Trinidadi, who is sort of a very sort of popular artist that takes part and mobilizes a lot of these spaces. So with that, I'm gonna jump right in. As soon as the first lyric of Dexter Garcia's infamous 2015 soca anthem transmits out of the sound system, the persona of Lucy is activated. Joyful screams produced at her recognition, the ferocious gyration of waistlines, and the collective singing of Garcia's well-known lyrics in intoxicated unisons are interrupted by the stampeding return of fete-goers, who, amidst their goodbyes to fellow friends, begin to run back into the club to get in one last wine before closing off the night. This is the call of Lucy. Here, and following and appropriating Garcia's voice and movements, the avatar of Lucy is activated as queer and trans Caribbean bodies work to corporally locate her pedagogies of resistance. However, when performed in public, such resistances are not without consequence. Particularly when mapped onto queer and trans bodies, rehearsals of racialized femininities can represent acts of serious transgression, as it invites punishment from everyday heteronormative powers, who see femininity as an ontological resource reserved only for cisgender women. However, the queer fet space provides a critical arena to queerly play with feminine embodiments of the carnivalesque, particularly for those who historically have not been provided with the room to negotiate their queer and trans selfhoods through the feminine. Thus, in embodying Lucy through acts of dancing and specifically whining, queer Indo-Caribbean participants transport a transnational politic of Afro-Caribbean feminist agency from the region to the dance floors of the queer diaspora. It is my argument here that such cross-corporal mobilizations between Afro-Caribbean feminism and femininities and the queer Indo-Caribbean dancing body, that contemporary Indo-Caribbean practices of freedom can be located and rehearsed. Similar to Alison Hines' groundbreaking soca anthem, Roll It Gyal, Lucy mobilizes forms of disruptive Caribbean femininities that, when embodied by Firquet participants, carries the capacity to mash up and fracture ideologies of heteronormative gendering, often involuntarily scripted onto the lives of queer and trans Caribbean communities. Thus, the political prowess of Lucy is derived from her ability to loosen everyday LGBTQI Caribbean subjects away from regimes of harm and towards practices of emancipation. This is followed by performing anti-colonial and feminist knowledges, particularly embodiments of erotic autonomy held within the Caribbean dancing body. Through turning to a woman of color feminist politic, we can read such embodied knowledges as inherent theories of the flesh. As conceptualized by Chicanx feminist scholars Cherry Moraga and Gloria Anzaldúa, theories of the flesh refer to the embodied ways of knowing birthed out of the global south or women of color's geographic and historical contexts. In following such knowledges, they argue that women of color and other marginalized voices can use their bodies as epistemological center to cultivate frameworks of transnational feminist connection and solidarity. In their words, turning to the woman of color's body provides a necessary roadmap to liberation, given that it holds, quote, the expression of evolving political consciousness and is the creator of consciousness itself, end quote. As a theory in the flesh in its own right, we're able to see how the persona or the avatar of Lucy foregrounds dance as a queer diasporic Caribbean pedagogy and cross-corporal language of self that enables self-determinative quest for liberation in the face of unfulfilled promises of freedom. I'm going to skip ahead for a second. First released as one of Dexter Garcia's entries for the 2015 Trinidad Carnival season, the song Lucy describes a coming-of-age story of an assumed Afro-Caribbean, potentially working or middle-class urban youth who desires to play mass on the Carnival Road. In the lyrics, which are shown here partially in this slide, Lucy describes herself as a respectable, modest, and well-to-do adolescent who ascribes to the racial, sexual, gender dynamics of heteronormative Afro-Caribbean womanhoods in Trinidad and Tobago. Yet the desire to access Carnival and its Bacchanalian sensibilities became too much to keep at bay, as Lucy was enforced to maintain distance from accessing spaces attached to scandal, taboo, and controversy, such as parties, nightclubs, fetes, and other carnivalesque spaces where social transgressions of self are imagined to take place. And I'm just going to play a brief snippet here of this song that I'm sure many of you have heard before, but just to sort of orient us to her sound.
I'm not hearing the audio.
Right?
I know, I'm not hearing the audio. Shakira, are you hearing it?
Oh, he has to share sound.
Yeah, can you share sound, please, Ryan?
But he,
Yep.
he has to go off the PowerPoint, share sound, and then share the PowerPoint again.
Let's see.
I'm glad that you brought it though, because there are some members of the audience who've not heard soca from Trinidad, so this is fine. And welcome,
Yeah.
actually.
And I'll replay it again.
Sure. We're hearing it now.
Queen of Bacchanal. I grew up as a real good girl, always home, don't go nowhere. As soon as I was introduced to Carnival, they say I lose all down on the ground, walking up the bottom, and it dragging all over tongue, and they say I lose. It was never a party at my school bazaar I used to go, but since I was introduced to Bacchanal, they say I lose. When I drop it hot and I wind it on top the speaker box and I grind it, and I don't want to stop and they call it. I lose that I lose it, I'm sweeter than juice it. This carnival have so lose.
I'm going to stop it there. I know it's an amazing song, but just in the interest of time, right? The lyrics noted above here on this slide evince an ontological transformation within the character of Lucy. Mobilized by affects of the carnivalesque and particularly ideologies of Bacchanal and its function as a disruptive to systems of normativity, on the queer fete dance floor, Lucy begins to penetrate the waistlines of queer and trans Indo-Caribbean participants as she uses the dancing body to perform Caribbean feminist articulations of carnivalesque erotic autonomies. My use of embodied pedagogy here is reliant on theorizations produced by Black and Caribbean feminist thinkers, seen notably through the work of M. Jackie Alexander, Audre Lorde, and Erna Broadber, who suggest that intrinsic visceral knowledge, held within felt and sensed phenomena, carries the capacity to produce important subjectivities that lead us to more affirming senses of self. As Garcia sings the chorus, the presence of the adolescent Lucy is converted into, well, and I'm spelling this differently than how it's shown here, but I'm spelling this as Loosey, as opposed to Lucy, right? So the conversion from Lucy to Lucy. An Afro-Caribbean feminist persona that occupies a disruptive subjectivity in performing the disaggregation of structural power, mobilized by her dancing body. The politicality of Lucy is clearly demonstrated through verbal language as well. In Caribbean vernacular speech, notions of looseness are often tied to themes of sexual promiscuity, vulgarity, and erotic agencies, which, when mobilized by queer participants, transform Lucy out of previous attachments of respectability and a fixed emplacement in the cisgender woman's body towards an archive of queer and trans possibility and transnational connection. In studies of Jamaican dancehall, such embodied feminist activations of sexual agency are also referred to as slackness, which describes how women in dancehall use performances of vulgarity and sexual excess to disturb cultures of respectability. As defined by Carolyn Cooper, slackness is a contestation of conventional definitions of law and order, an undermining of consensual standards of decency. At large, slackness is the antithesis of restrictive uppercase culture. It thus challenges the rigid status quo of social exclusivity and one-sided moral authority. Similarly, Lucy too embeds logics of racial, gendered sexual resistance, where the dancing body provides the ideological and effective weaponry to disturb discourses of heteronormative gender regimes. However, when mobilized to the queer diaspora, the transgressive meaning of Lucy's unsettling capacities are recontextualized. While Lucy was originally developed out of a heteronormative gendered consciousness, the resistances she provides in her original locale speak to critiques against misogynist underpinnings of Black women's life in the Caribbean. However, when occupied and embodied by queer and trans Indo-Caribbean participants, Lucy takes on the capacity to trouble the queer diasporic politics of an non-belonging in Canada and the US that invite an interrogation of racial and sexual marginalization to discussions of gender oppression. Through accessing and extending Lucy within the queer diasporic realm, she, and by extension the Black feminist politics she is engendered, is molded and adapted to affirm and cultivate queer Indo-Caribbean expressions of self. While no interviews currently exist that detail Garcia's intention to construct the Lucy transformation through dichotomies of the public-private, traditional cosmopolitan, and respectable illicit, I argue that the transformation of Lucy towards the Indo-Caribbean dancing body evidences how the recuperation of colonial anti-Black and misogynistic pain held within the Afro-Caribbean body is activated through engagements with embodied pleasures that function as critique to such violence. As further detailed by Uri McMillan, the concept of the embodied avatar carries a long-standing genealogy within Black women's legacies of performance in North America. In his study of 19th, 20th, and 21st century Black American woman performances, the framework of the avatar is used to refer to forms of impersonation and acts of role-playing and character performance that become intrinsic to negotiating alterity and performance arenas. As McMillan argues, for Black women performers, working through the avatar becomes not only a way to escape the confinements of everyday anti-Black violence and their sexual objectivities, but to distort and challenge the social roles attached to heteronormative ideologies of womanhood. Practices of Caribbean dance are the medium by which Lucy is activated, and thus I place focus on the feminist practices of whining when mobilized by queer and trans Indo-Caribbean queer-fet participants. By whining, I refer to the sultry and sexy movements of the waistline from side to side in accordance with the syncopated power rhythms of soca music. During acts of dance, whining becomes the embodied pedagogy by which ontological transgressions of self, rooted in the carnivalesque, are spoken. As associated in the music video, a cartoon caricature of Lucy, modeled after the facial characteristics and physique of singer Garcia herself, transports herself out of landscapes of everyday mundanity through following the itineraries of her waistline. In one of the first shots of the music video, Lucy is shown the child Lucy is shown completing housework in her living room, eyes glued to her television set as she watches an Afro-Caribbean woman masquerader wind up and down the Carnival Road. In this moment, the curvaceous and ferocity of her whining practice becomes the mediator of erotic autonomies, often not permissible outside of the carnival space. As Lucy the child watches in fascination and adoration, she is mesmerized by the feminist agencies bound up in the Afro-Caribbean woman's whining body. We can read such a moment through the framework of queer tactility, originally developed by queer Indo-Caribbean feminist scholars Crystal Nandini Gisyawan and Preeti Kumar, who argue that conventional ideas of queerness in the Caribbean and its diasporas can be restructured through effective physical bodily expressions by women, regardless of their sexual identity and practice. In transforming the affects of Bacchanalia from the television screen to Lucy's body, such ontological ruptures are as evidence from the transition from LUCY to LOOSEY, mobilize a queer tactile analytic to open up a space in which Indo-Caribbean women embody freedom, confidence, and comfort to rehearse expressions of gender and sexuality, particularly against the dominant heteronormative male gaze that always objectifies Caribbean women's relationship to same-sex desire and pleasure. As the chorus initiates, the metamorphosis of Lucy begins as the adolescent is transformed into LOOSEY. The carnivalist, amidst other groups of women who fixated in a trance-like state while listening and dancing to the song, are also intoxicated by its feminist activations. Adorned in a tight sports bra representing the Trinidad and Tobago flag, which is shown in this picture here, a flowing set of box braids fashioned within the Trinidadian national colors, and a very thin black bikini bottom barely covering the curvatures of her backside, Lucy emerges onto the screen, LOOSEY emerges onto the screen of the music video. In this transgressive role, Lucy functions here as an avatar of cultural resistance, whereby the sonic and embodied legacies of Afro-Caribbean feminist politics, such as Jamet sensibilities, can be performed in development of new transgressive femininities that become rehearsed on the queer fet dance floor, right? How much time do I still have?
Ryan, you should be making your closing comments now.
Perfect. Right. And so with that, some of the work that I do in this chapter turns to what I refer to as sonic maps, which I sort of very quickly skirted through when I was trying to showcase this. But the methodology in which I do this work largely follows the roles that Soca mediates in the dancing body. And I largely develop my methodology through following the work of Crystal Nandini-Gisiwan, who developed a framework called the emotional map, right, in her work, where she was talking to queer and trans Trinidadians about their relationships to feeling and sensation and emotion as a way to trace how they sort of build space and build cartography within wider terrains of heterosexuality. And so I developed a framework that, instead of turning to emotion and feeling, turns to sound, and particularly turns to soca. And all my informants across the diaspora had a very significant relationship to soca music. I know one of the sort of scholars here already mentioned chutney music, but what became really interesting for my informants is that they didn't really engage with chutney a lot at all in the diaspora. And chutney sort of became a vehicle for them to think through the traditional Indo-Caribbean place that often didn't bring in room to consider sort of Black formations of self or Afro-Caribbean feminist formations of self. And so soca here became sort of the vehicle by which queer and trans Indo-Caribbean communities sort of use their bodies to formulate understandings of what does it mean to be queer and Indo-Caribbean by following the itineraries of Black feminist critique. And so you'll see here, so these are some of the maps that they drew for me about where these were spaces where they were able to follow soca as a way to sort of build queer and trans ideologies of Indo-Caribbeanness. So you'll see here, this took me to Auntie's basements in Queens, New York, which you'll see here on the left-hand side. This was also practiced at a wedding space, right, which was seen here at a Hindu wedding on the right-hand side, right? Other informants talked about actually, so during COVID-19 in Toronto, New York City, as I'm sure it was in Trinidad, there were no fets happening because of sort of the health protocols put in place. So another thing I write about in my dissertation is the emergence of what I call the COVID fet or the Zoom fet, right? And these were party spaces that were happening in Toronto and New York City. I'm sure many were happening in Trinidad as well, where people took to sort of WhatsApp calls and Microsoft Teams meeting rooms and Zoom meeting rooms to build sort of digital fet spaces, right? When they didn't have access to the literal fet space. So you're sort of on the picture on the right showcases a potentially queer whiner, sort of dropping low and dancing in front of his computer when they didn't have access to the FET space, right? The car also became a FET space. And again, these are the physical FET spaces that I'm looking at. But my methodology of sonic mapping sort of works to sort of trace the relationships between queer Indo-Caribbeanness and our ties to Afro-Caribbean feminist culture production, and sort of what that actually does for us in the queer diaspora, and how that sort of mobilizes us to think differently about what the queer Indo-Caribbean can be. But with that, thank you so much.
Thank you. Very, very interesting, Ryan. Can you please comment or respond to this comment by Raveen? He's saying Carnival has nothing to do with Indian culture.
I respectfully don't agree with that statement, right? And because I think that produces a logic that sees Blackness and Indianness as always ontologically separate, right? And what I mean by that is that if we turn to the work of Gabrielle Hussein or Patricia Mohammed or many sort of scholars of Indian engagements with the Carnivalesque, there is a long-standing genealogy of our relationship to that place, right? Notwithstanding, though, the fact that we have been invited to that space. And I think that's what we need to remember as well, right? And a lot of the work that I'm doing in this dissertation is asking questions about how Blackness has built the Indo-Caribbean, right? Or how our relationship to Blackness has built the Indo-Caribbean, right? And I start my dissertation with a soca song called Sumintra, which I'm sure many of you know, where the song Sumintra, originally by Ricky Jai, right, who now has sort of been seen as sort of a figurehead of soca chutney, but actually begins his career in the calypso tent, right? And so I start with Ricky Jai in that song Sumintra, because in the chorus of Sumintra, the whole framework of Sumintra is a cosmopolitan Indo-Caribbean woman, right, who is sort of being pursued by another Indo-Caribbean man who is played by Ricky Jai, right? And in the song, he follows her to this, what becomes seen as a record shop, where he starts asking her in the lyrics, oh, what are you listening to? What are the songs that, and he starts relaying all these Indo-Caribbean songs to her. And she keeps saying to him in the lyrics, I don't want chutney. I don't want these conventional images or symbols of Indo-Caribbean experience. I want soca, right? And so I start by that to think about how is it, and this conversation around Creole, right? And this notion that we become Creolized through our arrival into the Caribbean is something that I'm very invested in, right? And this concept of, and I've always sort of had the politic that through I say our as a descendant of indenture, right? But through our dislocation from South Asia, we were radically transformed, right? And I argue that a part of that radical transformation begins with Blackness, begins with our relationship to Blackness, right? As a personal anecdote, I think about my grandparents who no longer are here anymore, but were from San Fernando. And for them, they used to always mark the church as a place in which their Indo-Caribbean Creole social upbringing was developed with Black folks, right? And so my relationship, as someone who is the descendant of Indo-Caribbean folks who were converted to Christianity in San Fernando by the Canadian Presbyterian Church, right? My relationship to my Indo-Caribbeanness cannot be separated from my relationship to Blackness and Black cultural formations and things like Creolized formations like Christianity in the Caribbean, right? Where my relationship, say, to Christianity is not just tied to Indian versions of Christianity, but is also tied to Afro-Caribbean versions of Christianity. And so I'm deeply invested in this sort of Creolized encounter that brings the Indian and the African together. And for me, that relationship begins in Carnival. It begins on the road. It begins in these sort of various spaces. But it helps us to think about how we have, in understanding Indo-Caribbean subjectivity, we've deeply transgressed ourselves outside of a South Asian conventional frame, which is often how the Indian gets talked about.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mahaber.
Yes, Ryan, thank you very much for that profound analysis. But I'm wondering, have you explored Indian dance from immemorial time to the present day, in which it provides an opportunity for queer and same-sex people and transgender people to express themselves, where men in decades gone by would put on skirts and lipsticks and so on, and even today in some of the dances, you would see that. So that women likewise too would dress like men and play the role in that repertoire. And have you also looked at the dancing in the carnival fetes and on stage with costumes? You hardly see men whining on men, but you see women whining on women. And in this phase of Carnival, where we have the 4 Bs, the bikini, the breast, the bottom, and something else, you see the women...
And the beads.
Beads, 4 Bs, yeah. You see the women almost nude, whining on other women. We don't see men whining on other men as much as we see this gender. So I'm wondering if you have looked at that and if you have any comments. Thank you.
100%. When you say dance, immemorial dance, I think you're referring to sort of pre-arrival in the Caribbean, right?
Yes, yes. But it
Okay.
exists up to today. Yeah.
Right. I have done a little bit of work. I'm actually writing a piece right now with a Guyanese dance archivist named Pramika Leo about archiving Nagara. And we also talk about in archiving Nagara relationships to Landa Kinach, right? Which particularly in the context I think it's done more. Actually, I don't know, but thinking about how we cannot use those frames we can't use a frame of drag to talk about what happens in those spaces, right? But yes, 100% is in my introduction. I spent some time thinking about, say growing up going to Indo-Caribbean weddings, right? I have 4 uncles and I used to always see them get very loosey with each other, bend each other over, wind up on each other. And that was only happening in, say, like the Soca chutney space, the wedding space, right? And I actually wrote an essay about 4 years ago looking at sort of legacies of Maticore festivities and how embodiments of Maticore show up in contemporary chutney spaces. I haven't done as much work looking at sort of pre-arrival Caribbean sort of South Asian practices. I'm very interested, but I'm more interested, I would say, in looking at sort of how those sort of legacies show up today, right? I remember like when I first started doing this work, I was reading work by Jasbir Puar, who wrote actually her doctoral dissertation on queerness in Trinidad, right? Despite her not really doing a lot of that work anymore. And she sort of spoke about these originary drag shows that existed in Trinidad, which I don't think exist anymore. One of them was called Divas, which was largely revolved around female impersonators and that sort of thing. But also she talked about how there was this dichotomy between, say, a Western version of drag performance that gets sort of incorporated into Trinidad versus more local embodied histories of what we would call gender role reversal, impersonation, cross-dressing. It's interesting, yeah, you guys brought up the beads and that sort of thing too, because I know in Toronto Carnival, we've actually seen queer people feel more comfortable to actually dance with each other in the space, right? So I've actually seen, cisgender men wear like high heels and beads and glitter and that sort of thing. And I'm not to say that those elements of performance are not without violence. I'm sure there is particular violences that do happen when those things take place. But I'm very invested in sort of what Carnival brings to the Indo-Caribbean subject when it helps us to sort of unravel those sort of holds of heteronormative masculinity, or really thinking about what is it about the Soca space or the chutney space that allows particular Indo-Caribbean communities to sort of transgress the boundaries of gender, right? The boundaries of heteronormative gender, and what about Soca is allowing them to do that. That's really what I'm sort of trying to do in this work.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much for that response. And I want to thank you for your presentation and for your time, Ryan.
Thank
I
you.
want to move on to the next speaker. But before I do, I want to address a comment that's being made by whomever is using the identity of Ravine. You want to talk about home invasions and killing of the diaspora. We are here every single week with a new topic. And by virtue of the fact that we are here and we are members of the same diaspora that you are referring to, we've not been killed. We know people who've been killed. We've not had our homes invaded, but we know people who've had their homes invaded. We understand it's important to you, and I want to thank you for raising it. However, please respect that we do have other things going on in the diaspora, and we do need to discuss these things as well. It may not be as important or as frightening or fearful as being killed or being threatened in that way, but at the same time, people are being killed and homes are being invaded all over in the world. Thank you for understanding. I want to bring on our next speaker now, and this is Professor Stephanie Lou George of the USC. She's affiliated with the Graduate Center at the City University of New York. She conducts multi-sited ethnographic research on music and sound in Guyana, New York City, and online. And I think she's going to start with a question for Ryan. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. I was trying to use the tool to show my hand emoji, but I couldn't seem to get that to work today. Yeah, thank you. I'll jump into my presentation in a moment, but I did have a question for Ryan. What a fascinating presentation. I always love hearing about your work and your performances in New York whenever you're here. So I know that you had said that you are not trying to work within the framework of South Asian diasporic studies, and having Indo-Caribbean studies be subservient to that. But I am curious, and where you are in Canada, and in comparison or contrast to a major city like New York City, what is the relationship with the South Asian Canadian diasporic queer LGBTQ communities, or in general, South Asian Canadian communities, in terms of what you said, which is fascinating, that soca rather than chutney soca, or maybe even other than South Asian popular musics, that's preferred, and that's the spatiality in which their sexuality is expressed and performed. I'm just wondering if you might speak on that. And of course, I agree too, not to just usurp this all into South Asian diaspora studies. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I would say I'll be quick because I know I would like you to
Yeah.
get to your presentation. I would say number one, this question of South Asianness, I would say when we talk about this in Indo-Caribbean spaces, we also need to remember that a lot of Indo-Caribbean folks identify as South Asian. So my particular position on this is I don't identify as South Asian because I feel like the labor diaspora out of which we come out of is not, as you said, is always sort of marginalized in conversations of South Asian diasporas, right? I actually just did a podcast 2 weeks ago in India, in Hyderabad, about questions of Indo-Caribbean feminism. And it was very revealing that a lot of folks, even there, were like, oh, we didn't realize there were Indians outside of India. Right. And so, like, even that question of having to sort of grapple with that. But I would say in Canada, there is a lot of tension between the South Asian community and the Indo-Caribbean community. We grew up in the diaspora often being told we're not real Indians, we don't speak Hindi or Urdu, we don't practice. And in Canada, the sort of overarching representation of South Asianness is, in Toronto at least, is tied to Punjabi culture, right? So Punjabi culture sort of gets really forefronted in sort of what becomes seen as the Indian, right? And because, we have sort of elements of South Asian culture in our culture, like Bollywood or like different other things, right? We sort of are able to sort of swim in and out of those frameworks. But there's both solidarity and there's both tension, just like with most marginalized communities, right? I would say New York is a little, obviously, this way better, is a little bit different. But also the geography of this plays out differently because in Toronto, the space, like in New York City, you have like Liberty Avenue, which is like the Indo-Caribbean like hub, right? We don't have geographic arrangements like that in Toronto, right? So we don't have like a micro neighborhood that's just for Indo-Caribbean people. Indo-Caribbean people in Toronto are living with, Jamaicans and Bajans and Tamils and South Asians and other people of color. So there are sort of what we'd call diaspora wars that happen, right, around the politic of authenticity, right? But the reason I sort of forefront Indo-Caribbean is because it places our local histories sort of at the focus, right? Whereas I feel like we become part of a subsection of South Asian diaspora when we sort of try to insert ourselves into that. So I'm of the position that I'm not really interested in trying to recuperate South Asianness to incorporate the Indo-Caribbean. I would much rather think with terms like the Indo-Caribbean, and I know this is a pejorative term, but also in the diaspora, the term Kuli gets used a lot. And I know in Trinidad, it doesn't in the same way. But Kuli also becomes a marker of political organization that a lot of folks have been using. And that's a whole different conversation around these sort of monikers of violence. But just to put that out there, that people have different identifications that they use that sometimes work with South Asian, but sometimes don't work with South Asian.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for answering that. Yeah, I completely concur with what you're saying. And I've seen those tensions play out too. And I've seen like the hierarchical understandings of, appealing to South Asianness, but also trying to find distinction as Indo-Caribbeans is an ongoing process, struggle. But changes are taking place too with these kinds of public performances. I was just thinking about how drag performances in New York often are these shared spaces, despite these very tensions of the dominance of South Asian American culture, and appealing to that, the diasporic consciousness of that, has in some ways empowered, but maybe also let's see if also Soca can have a greater space in New York. I'd love to see that. It sounds like Toronto's ahead in that regard. I think more people should listen to Soca and Chutney Soca or whatever. All right, thank you. I'm really glad to be here today. Thank you for your introduction. I'm so pleased that I could present with all of you today. Thank you for waiting, all of those that have been here for nearly 2 hours. Thanks to the hosts and also to those that are helping me troubleshoot this presentation, because just today my computer decided to crash, and after this conference, I will now clean my computer so this never happens again. So thanks for your patience. Thankfully, Zoom is running. I will read notes through Zoom, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to get my PowerPoint up. Thankfully, it's working. Let me make sure that I have all the settings. One moment. Share sound optimize, great. And I'm trying to make this full screen.
And we've got.
Let me see if I can still see my notes. It looks like, yes, at the bottom here. 1 second, thanks for your patience. Which icon would be notes?
We are seeing your lovely slides though.
Can you see me looking down here at the left hand corner, looking for my notes?
Yes.
Option? Is it this pencil? Let's see.
I'm not sure. I'm not seeing.
No, it's not pencil. It's not that guy.
Maybe it's better if you don't tinker with anything.
No. I'm not.
Yeah.
Let's run it as it is.
You have 15 minutes.
Yes, I know. Let me try one last thing. Can you still see me over here fumbling?
Yes.
On Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
No, not that. Notes. They were here. I guess this is not possible to have my notes up at the same time. Do you see my notes now?
No, we are seeing you.
Okay, let me just read my introduction and you can see me, then I'll get my PowerPoint going, if that's okay.
Sure.
All right, great. Scholars have long examined the dynamic relationships between aesthetic or cultural forms of carnival and related events and political formations within Caribbean and North American and Canadian and European diasporic contexts. Seminal publications of the early 1990s include Abner Cohen's Masquerade Politics, based on fieldwork that began in the 1970s about the, quote, urban cultural movements of Notting Hill, London Carnival, to undertake the serious study of, quote, seemingly frivolous, playful cultural movements like carnivals, fairs, and festivals, end quote, as depicted in popular imaginations and understudied in academia at the time alongside religious or so-called ethnic movement studies. And Philip Castanitz's Caribbean New York, Black Immigrants and the Politics of Race, in which he too examines carnival as a, quote, generator of ethnic identity, end quote, a, quote, peculiarly public visible event whose organizers insist that it makes an ethnic statement as a simultaneous assertion of cultural particularity to the outside world and a leveling of normal time distinctions, particularly among nations of origin within the community, end quote. These and other more recent studies, such as Elizabeth McAllister's work on Haitian Rara in New York, Peter Emmanuel's work on Indo-Caribbean music for also religious festivals, including Pugwash in New York, and Todd Cons and Thompson's 2017 edited volume about local and global imaginations of migration and mobility within carnival, contemporary art, and curatorial practices, all hone in on the significance of the affective dimensions of sonic, visual, and tactile collective experiences. Playing moss and other musical performances and sonic practices produce spaces or soundscapes for musicians, revelers, and in the case of the Madrasi Day Parade, the topic of my presentation, devotees of the Divine Mother Kali, or increasingly known as Mariamma, to emphasize her South Indian or ancient Tamil origins, in order to maneuver in diasporas and enact diasporic consciousness. At the same time, as I'll argue, the production of diasporic consciousness produces specific tensions in which aesthetic forms cultivated by particular Caribbean groups in a place like New York is met by ongoing motivations to unite Caribbean populations as a dynamic entity to be wholly capable of representing Caribbean culture at large, capital C culture at large, within multiculturalist paradigms that appeal to notions of a tolerant, multiracial modern nation state. Nonetheless, the vital role of participants, performers, and musicians in determining which components or criteria unite people are to be representative of diverse Caribbean cultures of ancestral heritages is always at play in the ongoing production of Diaspora. Okay. The idea and ideal of unity in diversity runs throughout Carnival and the Carnivalesque within Caribbean diasporas. For the United Madrasi Association, the notion is literally their motto, which I'll show you in a moment. Unity in the community. And as this motto also alludes, there are fissures in the community of Kali and Mariaman devotees, which is also known as Madrasi religion. So in this paper, I discuss what these fissures consist of briefly and how the Madrasi Day Parade is a bold and creative attempt to heal them through musical performances and narratives about Madrasi sonic practices in the North American public. I don't want to veer from my notes, but we're getting there. At least you could see this. The primary purpose of the parade is to absolve these fissures, hierarchies, and ambivalence about Madrasi style puja. And as the founder of the Madrasi parade, Vijay Ramjatan, Indo-Trinidadian American, explained, to, quote, erase the shame of the religion that was discriminated solely based on their choice of deity, and to say in this religion that we are one. Vijay and other leaders of the United Madrasi Parade Association view the parade as an opportunity to gain legitimacy through public recognition in attempts to bring Madrasi temples together, as well as gain equal status to Hindu orthodoxy. I'm showing some photos now, and I will do full screen in a moment when I show my video, of floats in the Madrasi Day Parade. And this is the emblem for it here that you see.
Okay, Stephanie, you
Yes.
need to share screen for us to see any part of it.
Oh no, okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. What if I do this for now?
While you're doing that,
Yes.
is that Madrasi Association, okay, United Madrasi Day Parade.
Yes.
So is that attended to by, or who attends this?
Yeah.
Who
Yeah.
participates in this?
Great question. I'm getting into that, but I should share sooner. You're right. So the the Madrasi Day Parade is hosted by the association called UMA, United Madrasi Association. And it's, as I said, the founder is an individual, a very charismatic and dynamic individual who's of Indo-Trinidadian descent, emigrated about 20 years ago as a teenager to New York City, who had never been involved in Kali worship in Trinidad until coming to New York, which is actually the story of many within the larger Indo-Caribbean Madrasi community, we could say, of New York. I don't like to throw out numbers, but I mean, I've done field work throughout the decade. I feel old, but throughout the decade, at numerous temples, handfuls, 15 to 20 throughout the New York metropolitan area. We could say 40, 50,000, but you know, these numbers of Madrasis are self-identifying as Madrasi is something that is personal, but increasingly public today, especially in something like the Madrasi Day Parade, which was inaugurated in 2017, and there have been 4 ever since. Does that answer your question? So it's I'm going to just go ahead and share full screen. I'm going to wing it. I think Dr. Kumar Mahabir is right. I'm going to wing this today. Let me just share full screen.
Yes, and you did answer the question. Actually, I was just clarifying for the sake of
Yeah.
Raheem, who
And
thought it should be referred to as Chennai. But the thing about it is that Indo-Caribbeans did not originate from Chennai. Chennai did not exist when indentureship occurred. And so
right, I know the Madras presidency consisted of many present-day nations, or present-day states of India. Absolutely. And elsewhere in my work, in my dissertation and elsewhere, I talk about the emergence of this narrative, both the prestige and the cultural capital of performing this narrative and yet also being empowering for Madrasis who for so long, as I will get into a little bit here, have had to deal with ambivalence and anxieties about their practices, dealing with sound and somatic practices too. Spirit possession, animal sacrifice, all these things that very much are similar to what are studied as Afro-Caribbean religions, at least within disciplines of ethnomusicology and anthropology. And so thanks for your patience again. I'm going to now just share full screen the PowerPoint. Are you able to see it? It doesn't look full screen to me.
Not in full screen yet.
There we go.
Right.
And there's significance too to the title, from bottom house temples to parade, and I'll be getting to that as well. Just briefly, I'll just describe, and to help answer your question, are some photos of the parade. Here is the emblematic Madrasi flag that is often hoisted in the yards here in New York and Guyana and in Trinidad. Sometimes the striations are interchangeable and have different significances, but yellow, white, and red, and this is a huge one, the biggest one I ever saw, and I think that many of the participants had ever seen here on Liberty Ave in Queens and Richmond Hill. And showing this idea, I thought, of the unity and diversity. These folks here, to further answer your question, come from multiple temples, and they've come together in this parade, in this space, to be able to achieve the idea of unity and diversity, or unity in the community. And many of these temples are not always considered to be, quote unquote, maybe official temples. There's some politics behind that I can maybe answer in Q&A, but there has been an emergence of hierarchical categories in which some are seen as more authentic as not. Again, the narrative of it having ancient Tamil origins, which I argue is probably something that was spurred here in the North American diasporic context, and downwards to bottom house temples. This is a term that I have heard, not one I've devised, by mostly Indo-Guyanese Americans, in which, you know, having a temple in your basement, worshiping Kali or Mariamma in your basement is not official. It's also impure, and I mean, that's one narrative of it. So from, say, what I call neo-Tamil traditionalists to some of that are a little more friendly to Sanatan Hindus, in which they don't perform live sacrifice, they too call themselves Madrasis, and then to the various so-called, right, bottom house temples where real worship does take place, but are often sources of anxiety for all worshipers. Some more photographs here of the presiding deity who was constructed for the parade, and she is installed every year, and that is Vijay Ramjatan right there, that some of you may know, and some of his assistants. And just some examples of some Madrasi temples that have participated, located in South Jamaica, Queens, various pujaris who are still trying to establish themselves and have smaller numbers, might be criticized of being a bottom house temple, but are looking to buy property or have already been able to buy property that are separate from temple and residences. And now I'd like to show you a clip. I think this is from 2018, to give you an idea of the parade. And what you see here is actually Krishna here in this particular, the Murti of Krishna in this particular installation being hoisted. I love the word hoisted that I've learned through my field work. And you'll see in the back here where the U.S. flag is Kali, who also some believe is Mariamma and is being carried back here. And you'll also hear a whole troop of tapu drummers. Tapu is the emblematic instrument for Madrasi religion, and also a problematic, ongoing, historically problematic source of anxiety for its repetition, it being loud, voluminous, thunderous, but also, of course, it's powerful, and it facilitates worship and invokes the deities, invokes the Divine Mother and the various pantheon within them, the various deities of the Madrasi pantheon. So I'll just give you an idea of that, and then if there's any questions afterwards, I'm going to fast forward it a bit here. 1 second. I should also say the singing that you hear that's being amplified through the microphones and a PA system that's located on the truck is the singing of the Mariam Madrasi, which has become the most revered sacred text. Madrasi religion for a long time has lacked official text like other world religions. This one has now been adopted and used at basically virtually all Madrasi temples. In fact, can you see me? Yeah, there are pamphlets that were printed for the Madrasi Day Parade, such as this one, that you can see some of them are holding so that they could read the same text together and be in unison. Again, remember, these are members from various Madrasi temples that have decided to participate. So that's what we're hearing them recite. She's the final float, and behind her is a deity called some say Kalbairo, but Madurai Viren, and sometimes too to emphasize a Tamil heritage. Sorry. I had some more video clips of the parade and some other roles in which you have some volunteers that sweep and clean. In a way like jarring the street, but just cleaning the street. They're in the front of the parade and then proceeding onwards with the tapu drummers and the floats of the various temples. But for lack of time, I'm going to keep moving forward. Sorry, this is so disjointed. Thanks for your patience in following. Why is it moving without me? Okay, once the parade processes down Liberty Ave, it's the same route as the Pagwa Parade. Everyone congregates in the Phil Scooter Rizzo Park, more popularly known as the Smoky Oval Park in Richmond Hill, Queens. And here you can see that there is the presiding deity, Kalbairo is in the back. And this gives you an idea of the enthusiastic throng. Tapu drummers, also the tapu drummers, many of them were young children and women that you do not typically, and this you don't typically see in Madrasi temples, especially those that might consider themselves to be neo-Tamil traditionalists. Here too, as they're bringing her in to install her in a corner, in a special place there. You see the guards and the police and the various officials that are there that have given the permits and whatnot to conduct this. And I thought this also was important that Vijay Ramjatan here is invited and took these very important photos with the New York State Senator Jean Liu, or council members and assembly leaders currently running right now. Len Shulman, Jennifer Raj Kumar, who is, I believe, of Punjabi descent. Could be wrong about that. I've tried to find out. Japneet Singh, definitely representing the Sikh communities of Queens and Brooklyn. And also significantly here in the right-hand corner is the Dr. Uma Mysakor, who's the president of the Hindu Temple Society of North America. And this was also commonly known among Indo-Caribbean Americans as the Ganapati or Ganesh Temple in Flushing, Queens. And this is actually the first Hindu temple in North America, and it fashions its architecture is of South Indian gopurams. It's quite impressive in ways, and some Indo-Caribbeans go there throughout the week. Just to give you an idea of some kinds of performances. So again, the performances that were selected were to showcase the diversity of the Madrasi community and their choice songs, whether it was skits or performances of the Ramayan, or singing Hindi language bhajans, or dancing to the accompaniment of Tamil devotional songs about Mariamman or Kali, or even I'll get back to that, or even Kateri, of a controversial figure, such as this one, which I'll play very quickly, a couple seconds. She's supposed to be the goddess Kateri, but you also see another dancer with her that is in praise of her as well, and when she's wearing a certain kind of garment that is common within Madrasi communities. A Tamil devotional song sung by a popular singer that that Indo-Caribbeans often perform and learn to sing, L.R. Swari. All right, now here in this clip, I wanted to play for you Vijay Ramjatan's revealing of the United Madrasi. At the time, it was called the Foundation, at the start of at its inception. But he talks a bit about the tensions and fissures within the community. So I thought it'd be great to hear his voice here.
Planning committee, give them a round of applause, guys. The dream she gave me was she was sitting on a chariot and she was throwing out flowers to her devotees.
He's talking about a dream that he had of the Divine Mother.
Gave me was she was sitting on a chariot. It started back in May when I had a dream of the Divine Mother. The dream she gave me was she was sitting on a chariot and she was throwing out flowers to her devotees on the street. And behind her, she had an ocean of yellow, like today, how all of you had yellow clothes on. She was behind her, had all these people in yellow. So I figured, Ma, why are you giving me this dream or this chariot and you throwing flowers out? And I thought about the idea. I said, she wants a parade. She wants to bring all her temples, all her devotees together. That's right. My dear friends, what we have in our community today, right now, we have a lot of separation. What we have in our community is my temple is bigger than your temple. What we have in our community is my tapu guys play better tapu than your guys. What we have in our community today is we temple, we wear 50 limes around mother neck. And in your temple, you don't even wear lime. In my temple, we take rope lash. In your temple, we take chain lash. This is the kind of nonsense that's happening in our community. And what everyone fails to realize is who we're worshiping? Mahakali. The leaders in our community, many of them, what they do, they highlight what separates us, what makes us different. Their temple small, my temple big. They highlight what makes us different, and they forget to remember what unites us all is who? Mahakali. Today, my dear friends, I had this committee over here right now, and let's give them the names really quick. I couldn't do this alone. They are Muslims, they are Christians, they are Muslims, they are Christians, some of them a little wide, some a little small. We're equal opportunity. But my dears, on a serious note, they are the ones who sat with me and decided how we're gonna do this parade, how we're gonna make this show, and I want to give them, behind me, make a difference in the world. So, incorporated.
Okay, I had a quote as well that I wanted to read from him in a different introduction that also I think I could follow up quickly. How much time do I have, by the way?
Stephanie, actually, you're 5 minutes beyond 5 p.m.
Okay.
and we generally close at 5 p.m.
Okay, sure. I will just stop. I think I can just answer more questions later. I had more performances to show and things like that, but I think you get the general idea here that we can open up for discussion. Sorry, I'm not able to read my paper today as I had planned, and the brilliant conclusion that I have for you, but that's okay. I don't want to go over time. Thank you.
No, but I'll give you a minute to
Okay.
conclude.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Indo-Caribbean Americans hosting the Madrasi Day Parade in New York City. I've presented this to consider to what extent performance provides devotees an effective arena through which to transcend stigmatized boundaries of Madrasi-style worship throughout colonial and post-indentureship contexts and post-migration contexts in North America and beyond. Devotees' participation in the public space of the parade, similar to the annual Pugwa Parade, increases Indo-Caribbean visibility within the U.S. body politic through this sonic and visual presence. But it also increases the credibility of otherwise historically, and it also increases the credibility of these historically stigmatized sonic practices, while being recognized by the state. I mean, there are certain things here that aren't being performed, right? We don't see the flagellation here that we've talked about in other panel presentations today, or we don't see the fire oath. You know, we don't see all the rituals on stage, but we do hear tapu, we do see some of the dances, and we do hear some of the prayers and reciting of the Mariam Mantala too, and so forth. But I think those are strategic choices to be made, is my argument. Just let me go down a little bit here. Final words. The Madrasi Parade is crucial for Indo-Caribbean self-assertions and emancipatory politics to maneuver within these source lands. Source lands I'm taking from Aisha Khan's idea of source lands, locations that are culturally defined, identity conferring, and exclusivity inducing in racialized terms. The Afro-Caribbean or Afro-Atlantic diasporas and Indo-Caribbean or Asian Atlantic diasporas, they're typically linked to slavery and indenture respectively. And here I'm arguing they maneuver within these, potentially transcending within these source lands, their particular sonic practices and mediating these tensions. Whereas these Madrasi sonic practices and dominant diaspora narratives may reify notions of Indian authenticity, they primarily are creative and bold attempts to present Madrasi aesthetics and poetics of unity in diversity to be unbound and achieving a greater acceptance and legibility through musical performance and the sounding of a diasporic global Madrasi Hindu goddess worship. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Mahavir has his hand up.
Yes, thank you for a wonderful and unique presentation, Professor. My question is, and we're running out of time, we're past the time to end, is reverting to the topic of the webinar today on Carnival. Are you positing that this is a sober form of Carnival? It's we see the costume, the street parade, the drumming, the singing, and so on, but minus the alcohol consumption, the fixation on the flesh, and all of that. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I absolutely. I mean, this is an extension of the carnivalesque or of Carnival itself, and or playing Mas. You're right. I mean, there are none of those things taking place. I mean, however, say there are some overlapping nodes, right? Because in Madrasi worship, which makes it different from Orthodox Hinduism, the Sanatan Dharma, is that they do use offerings of alcohol and cigarettes, you know, for instance. But
That's
yeah,
true.
but you're right. We're not seeing
What?
this play out in the ways that you
Alcohol
would
and cigarettes and offering.
at Carnival,
Yeah.
etc. And you're right. There is no dancing or whining or anything like that to this music, right? It's seen. It's to be presented as part of these religious practices and traditions. And yet, there's something to be said, I think, and that is significant for these communities to do this publicly, to even have this parade. I mean, so recent, right? As of 2017, it's really taken someone to take the initiative to do such a thing. I mean, for so long, Madrasi temples have not been visible in ways that they are today. And I argue some of that is because they're appealing to the cultural cachet or of a South Asian diaspora religion and narratives of timelessness, and at the same time, they are able to reinvent their religions as anyone can. But there is this tension there. But I don't know. I think it's something I want to think more about, Dr. Mahabir. I think it's a fascinating thing to think about, this idea of these public performances. And yes, you're right. There's no playing Mas here, but in ways of playing Kali for the American public. I mean, this is an opportunity for them to see that there is a certain sense of freedom, and they in a lot of these speeches, the ideas of our privileges, our freedoms, our rights are being enacted. We're able to do this now, and but again, that's through New York, and that's through the North American state, and that's through the granting of those rights. But I wish I had more time, and I would have planned this better. There are moments in which people are dancing, especially to some of the songs like performed by Robbie Dalip, who's an excellent singer of Trinidad, and Tassa is involved as well. And at the end of it, people have a cathartic release too, in which they're dancing together to Tassa, and Tapu conjoined. I had a clip of that. And it is a time of merriment. I mean, people are very excited and just glad that they were able to carry something like this out in the public. So there's overlap and maybe some similar sentiments, but obviously I don't want to make a binary between religion, secular, and the spiritual, and religion and non-religions here. But this space is one in which they're trying to maybe navigate some of that. Yeah. Good question. I'll think more about it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We will take our final question and or comment from Burton Sankrali.
Yeah, I would like to ask, this network of Madras temples, does it involve Caribbean temples, in that the Caribbean material, or what comes under Kali Puja, includes stuff from further up the east of India, coming out of Calcutta? It's not, strictly speaking, Madras per se. Even the name for the mother, Kali, is more popular in the East than in Madras itself, and he used the name Kali. So one, is it only from Madras, or are there Caribbean temples involved? Is there this other material coming in? And two, is there spirit possession on the road, as happens in the street thing in Kali temples in Trinidad, where people in possession go to the river and bring it back? That is how it takes place on the road in the Trinidad setting. This is a different setting, I realize.
Yeah, great questions. And I've met you before. It's good to see you here again. It was many years ago.
Well, I'd like to get in touch
Trinidad.
with you as you're doing this.
Yeah, we will.
I'm involved in Kali worship.
Yes,
yeah.
I know. I want to answer the second half of your question, questions, which is, in the most recent Madrasi Day parade, there were a couple of participants that began to manifest, as people say, or began to play as they were invoking, because there is a moment in the parade at the very beginning, before they process on the street on Liberty Ave, in which they do pray to Mother, and they do play Tapu to facilitate this portion, to honor her, to have a successful parade, similar to a puja or a Sunday service, like in the sense of the same sort of song, Mariam Mantala too, and singing and things like that. And yes, this has happened. And I actually interviewed Vija and the woman to ask, how did you feel about what happened? And, and to some extent they say, well, we try not to invoke any of the deities or Mother during this time. We try not to. And in fact, like say in this pamphlet, right, there are only certain lines that they read that they think that may not have that sort of extra power to create manifestation. And they don't want it to happen initially, but it has happened. And when it has happened, it's been conveyed to me, we should not be ashamed of this. Now it is time we can do this. There's no shame to it. I wish I could pull up the quote quickly for you all, but yeah, it's happened, and it's something that I think people were surprised about, and I think it will happen more. And this might actually answer some of Dr. Mahabir's questions too, that I want to further explore. And then your first question, a lot of these terminologies say for the name, the appellation for the presiding deity, Kali versus Mariamman. In the course of my work, right, I always knew it as Kali worship as well. And that's because of the predominance of, I think, Trinidadian scholars who did excellent field work, even non-Trinidadians, right? The Niehoffs in the 50s who were doing field work in Trinidad. And, I went as far back as I possibly could, even in the archive by British administrators. I never quite found Mariaman. And I never found Madrasi connected to, or Tapu drumming, for instance, connected to Tamils, right? Only. Or Kali worship only connected to Tamils. That's not something I want to get too much into here today, but what I think is interesting is that we do have that narrative today. And I think it is something that might be indicative also of Indo-Guyanese and Indo-Trinidadian communities, where here in New York, there is a greater presence of Indo-Guyanese. And we're talking head pujaris, those that are the head priests of these temples, to my knowledge, and I could be wrong, and I've been doing this for a decade, and I keep asking, and I keep doing fieldwork, even though I'm not supposed to right now, is, where are the Trinidadian head pujaris? And it's not quite the case yet. But you have someone like Vijay Ramjatin, who is spearheading something like the Madrasi parade, and for him, this is maybe his way of officially sanctioning Madrasi religion in the diaspora. I mean, he's someone himself who was, and I could speak on this, and if he was here, he would speak on this, that he was not privy to some of the information at the Madrasi temple that he was part of for many years. He some of that has to do with pedagogy and ideas of how to learn about the knowledge of this tradition.
Okay.
But about the Kali thing and Bengalis and Calcutta, yeah, there's actually now emerging discourses that, hey, maybe it's not even just Tamil anymore, and this is from practitioners, right? I'm not talking about scholars. But what I'm looking at, I guess, was this emergence of the ancient Tamil diaspora narrative, and now we are starting to see, as you're saying, perhaps broadening that out as well to Bengali culture as well, and ever more complicated
So this
and rich.
conversation, Stephanie, I mean, this is just all very fascinating, and we've now moved quite away from Carnival into a whole other realm. And unfortunately, we don't have time to continue with this because I want you to stay where you are, but we do need to close off the live stream and so on. So unfortunately, we are going to bring it to an end. But I want to say thank you very much to all our 4 speakers. You've done exceptionally great presentations, so insightful, so informative, and we really thank you so much for that. I'll close now and ask Shakira to bring it to a formal close. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shalima, and we want to thank everyone for taking
Thank you.
to attend and to participate. And as we've said earlier, this public meeting is being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center. And our topic next Sunday will be various fasting practices in the Indian diaspora. So we look forward to that discussion. So please visit, like, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to see all our past recordings. I am Shakira Mohammed of Trinidad and Tobago saying goodbye. May God bless you all. Dhanyavad.